Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of the Emerald Planet and Emerald Planet TV. We come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technology, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we have a planet of 9 billion people by 2038 and possibly 12 to 13 billion by the end of this century, how are we going to be able to take care of all these people on planet Earth? And that's what Emerald Planet's all about. We come to you looking at the solutions, the best practices from around the globe as we create the Emerald Planet. Hello, welcome to the Emerald Planet. We're making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And seeing the long-term impacts of climate change. We're glad to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Looking at pollination and pollinators, this is really one of the critical stories of the climate change and the impacts that humans are having on nature, both the plants, the animals, and even the biome as far as the microorganisms. And so we have someone that's a specialist who's going to be talking about this, the pollinator decline, and what we must do as humans to address this issue. This is Kerry Wixted. She is the Education Outreach Specialist, Wildlife and Heritage Services for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And Kerry, welcome again to the Emerald Planet.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back.
Now, looking at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, it's amazing the diversity and the span of life that you actually deal with, the plants, the animals, even the microscopic beings that's in the soil, around all of the plants, the trees. So how is the Maryland Department of Natural Resources kind of put its arms around all this great amount of diversity and at the same time try to protect it from humankind and our encroachment on the land, in the air, and the water?
Well, we have to balance the needs of not only wildlife and nature, but also people, because people factor into the equation. And so we work a lot across the state of Maryland and also regionally and nationally, particularly for habitat conservation, to make sure that we have these habitats that support suites of species instead of just individual species.
Yeah. Looking at pollinator decline, and this is a very poignant photograph that you've taken. Share what we're seeing here. We see the great beauty of this. What are we missing?
So this picture I recently took in West Virginia in a natural area, and essentially this plant is called bee balm, and as its name suggests, it's very attractive to bees and also to hummingbirds and a ton of other pollinators. This is a plant I often suggest to put out in gardens because of its attractiveness. However, nobody was visiting this patch.
I tell you, that's just absolutely incredible to think of that, that we have, these beautiful plants and we don't have the pollinators. But looking at this decline as far as the insects are concerned, why is it so critical that we know this fact, and then why we need to be doing something about it?
Globally, massive insect declines are being documented, and a recent study by York University researchers found that almost 94% of wild bee and native plant networks have been lost over the last 100 years. And to quote another researcher, Dr. Pedro Cardosa, who published some of the biodiversity loss research, he mentions with species loss, we lose not only another piece of the complex puzzle that is our living world, but also biomass, essential, for example, to feed other animals in the living chain, unique genes and substances that might contribute to cure diseases, and ecosystem functions, which we depend upon.
So I want to stay here for just a minute. This is really an interesting chart. And you had that statistic in the very beginning as far as the decline, the percentage. So if you will, share that again. And let's look at these species and how these are negatively impacting because of their loss, not because there's too many of them.
Yeah, so this graphic is just looking at the overall decline of species and their populations across the world in the last 10 years. And the 94% statistic that I shared is looking at relationships between bees and their plants. And that has declined by 94 for the last 100 years. So tremendous amount of loss.
Yeah, and also we're looking at these various species here as far as the loss is concerned. What are we seeing here? Or what are we not seeing here?
Well, some researchers have coined this loss as the windshield phenomenon. So if you drove around 20, 30 years ago, you might remember lots of bug guts on your car windows. It was annoying. I remember my dad's old truck wiper blades would never keep up, and we had to hand scrub them off. But today that phenomenon has decreased, and it's easy to see that indicator that insect populations have been declining.
Yeah, it's just amazing, and I was saying that in kind of a laughing way as what we're not seeing, because we don't really think about that. When we were children, going back, a number of decades, we really did have a great amount of bugs, squashed all over the windscreen, and you're seeing this is perfectly clear. So that really is an indicator of the loss that we've had as far as the natural world is concerned. What are we seeing here?
Well, this is kind of a representation of climate change, which is a large driver of pollinator loss. Over the last 100 years or so, annual temperatures have changed by 2.5 degrees, which might not seem like a lot, but it alters the time that plants are blooming, which is going to affect those relationships with those pollinators. It kind of throws them out of sync. In addition, things like drought can impact pollen and nectar production. So plants might not be producing as much nectar to feed the pollinators if they're drought stressed, because they're kind of keeping that water for themselves. And then temperature can also drive things like migration. So these temperature swings, warmer temperatures mean that monarchs might stay in Canada longer and migrate south later. But when they do that, they face colder temperatures in some of the southern climates. And that's not conducive for travel. In addition, you throw in some extreme weather events and migration can be a lot more hazardous than usual.
Yeah, and again, it just contributes to declines and loss as far as the pollinators are concerned. And again, it goes directly related to the food, and all that's very important. But also, what is the impact as far as insecticides and pesticides on pollinators, which are really necessary and needed as far as food production?
Yeah, pesticides, and that includes insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. They can all play a role in pollinator decline. And it's important to note, just because a pesticide's labeled as organic doesn't mean necessarily that it's safe for pollinators. There are many considerations when choosing different pesticides options, including efficacy and specificity and costs and risks. And organizations like the Xerxes Society and Cornell have put out some really helpful guides on how to minimize the risk to pollinators. Overall, you have to think of like multiple pest management solutions, that integrated pest management.
Leaving a sign up for just a minute, is there any way that we can actually do this naturally? Do some of the pollinators actually interact with each other so that some of the pests may be reduced, or do we need all of them equally?
Well, certainly some of our pollinators do double duty, like our yellow jackets. They help eat pests in the garden while also helping to pollinate. And some of our flies do that as well. So that's the benefit of having a functioning ecosystem, is you're going to have those checks and balances.
Okay, that's absolutely wonderful. Looking at grass, everyone loves grass. We love to have it around. Actually, where I am now, I'm putting in 3 rain and basecaping gardens, planted another 7 trees, and trying to move away from just grass. Why is grass maybe really having a negative impact on our native populations of pollinators?
Well, habitat loss is one of the largest threats to biodiversity today, and that includes to our pollinators. And over 40 million acres across the United States is locked up in lawn. These lawns are often comprised of monocultures of non-native grasses that provide very little in the way of ecological benefits to pollinators and to other insects. And in some cases, these areas can serve as nursery habitat for pest species like Japanese beetles. So if you want to reduce your pesticide usage, you can get rid of your lawn.
Yeah, well, this is the whole thing as far as the rain gardens and the basecaping. It's very important to bring back these native species, but also nature is changing dramatically, and we've seen that just in our short lifetime. But what are we seeing here, and why is this hazardous to pollinators?
Well, this is a picture of light pollution, which is something that's starting to be talked about more recently as a driver for some of that insect decline. Light pollution is the presence of artificial light in the night environment, and it can disrupt nocturnal pollinators and lead to reduced numbers of fruits being produced by plants that depend on that nocturnal pollination. And it can also disrupt pollinator life cycles. So if you've ever left your porch lights on and noticed all the insects that collect around it, they're hanging out there, but they're not going out and reproducing and eating and doing everything they're supposed to be doing. So that's factoring into the decline. So everything from the lamp type to the lighting regime and the distance from the light to plants can affect how that light is going to impact the pollinators.
Yeah, it's amazing you brought that up because I never even thought about that. But when I was a child, to be out at night, we'd have the lights on the porch. I mean, it'd just be, dozens of different species all around the light. And I can leave my light on here and maybe have none whatsoever. So the decline is very noticeable. But losing a monarch, I've been down with the Natural Partners. I'm on that board of directors, and we collaborate with the EmeraldPlanet International Foundation. And the monarch butterfly is our poster child. And we work very carefully with Canada, the United States, and Mexico on this. So why we need to really be taking care of the poster child of pollinators, the monarch butterfly, as a greater message as far as all species.
Well, this is a species that, again, so many people connect to. So from Canada down to Mexico, I mean, the Day of the Dead is such an important cultural celebration, and monarchs are part of it. And it's just a species that a lot of people can, I guess, can have relationships with, compared to something like a wasp. They're not as cute and fuzzy, and it's harder to understand why we should care about wasps compared to something like a monarch.
But it's just like flies and other things. We just have to have them. Why is this in here as far as the decline of pollinators?
So this picture, the picture on the left, is what was a showy lady slipper orchid that had been chewed on by deer. And essentially the deer just chewed off the flowers there. So deer overbrowsing is having an impact on plants. They can remove those floral resources, which are the food for pollinators. They can also remove host plants, which is the nursery habitat for caterpillars of butterflies and moths. And in some studies, deer have also been found eating caterpillars as a byproduct of that browse. So.
And what are we seeing here?
This is a monarch caterpillar, and as I mentioned on the last slide, host plants are important because they support the life cycle. And the lack of plants to support the full life cycle of organisms is also an issue. So sometimes when we're designing our gardens, we only think about the adults, the showy butterflies and the adult bees, but we also have to think about putting in plants that these caterpillars are going to eat, or that the bees are going to nest within, and essentially supporting the full life cycle instead of just part of it.
So we have just about 10 seconds left. It's very important that the wildlife and the heritage actually stays together then, because they're mutually supportive of each other. Am I correct?
Yes, it's very important to think about the whole ecosystem and the web.
Thank you very much for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.